Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Hello and welcome to a Thursday edition of the Hoosier Football Tailgate. The Hoosiers are a week into the 2024 fall camp. Not much has occurred over the last week or so, being that there's an acclimation period that you've got to go through, a couple days in your underwear, as we like to say, and a couple more days in what we call shells, which is just shoulder pads and helmets. They're getting now into the full padded practices, which I think will pick up in intensity as they've spent the last week, I'm sure, acclimating the newcomers to the football team on how we like to practice there at Indiana and all the daily aspects of what is expected from the newcomers, and a refresher for those veterans, I guess you could say, in terms of understanding where they need to be and how they need to be there, and as well as I said, how to practice and what is expected on and off the field. Of course, a lot of installation is occurring during this time period as well. So I'm sure they're taking their time with the installation, being that they've got the newcomers in, but that will pick up very quickly as the pads go on here in the next day or so, and the Hoosiers walk into week two on course to prepare for their home opener against Florida International here in a couple of weeks. But let's do a quick business, as we like to say here. Want to thank BetOnline, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything online sports betting. Right now, you can receive a 50% bet of up to a free bet up to $250 on your first deposit to bet on anything from the Olympics to baseball to Formula One racing, and quite quickly approaching football. BetOnline has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game is over, head over to our online casino, get in a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today, betonline.ag, to get in on all the action. Use the promo code BELIEVE, that is BLEAV, for your 50% free bet credit on your first deposit up to $250. BetOnline is where the game starts here. Also want to thank those affiliates that have joined the Hoosier Football Tailgate. You can find those links to those companies on my bio page on X or Twitter, however you want to refer to it. It's a link tree. We'll give you a link to all the affiliates that have joined the Hoosier Football Tailgate. Everything from PitBoss and Louisiana Grills that have some great smoking pellet grills, as well as the griddles that are all taking grilling by storm, I guess you could say, and some very nice game day or tailgating items for purchase that will make that experience a little bit easier in terms of the size that you need to take around. So go to the PitBoss and Louisiana Grills, use the link and get some discounts on that. There's also links to 8 Sleep, which is a company that has a covering that goes over your bed, over your mattress, and I have one of those right now, and I did, full disclosure, pay the full price for it, but it regulates your temperature of your bed each and every night, gives you a detailed breakdown of your sleep patterns. So all those are right there. I appreciate them coming on as them being affiliates. If you happen to purchase something, I will be given a commission on that particular sale. All the money there comes right back into the show here so that we can bring you the best content on the Hoosiers each and every week during the season, as well as the off season. So thank you to all those that have joined us. And like I said, you can find that on my bio or on YouTube. You'll find that in the description, all the links to those entities that have come on board with Hoosier Tailgate. So got that put away in nice orderly fashion. Let's talk a little bit about football. Some breaking news here over the last couple of days, and some of it quite serious, as Michigan has found out one of the investigations that's going on related to Coach Harbaugh during his time there in the recruiting era of the COVID years, where he had some impermissible contact with recruits, and he was slapped with I believe what they classify as a level 1 violation. He got a 4-year show cause in terms of his ability to come back to the NCAA. So from 2024 through 2028. And if any school would happen to hire him, they would have to show cause as to why. And if they went through the hiring, they would immediately have to suspend him for 1 calendar year. So chances of Coach Harbaugh ever appearing in college football again, I would say, would be slim to none over the last 4 years. Now, after the 28 season, I believe he's free to come back in if he so chooses to do. But that's a pretty hefty response from the NCAA, and this has nothing to do with the Connor Stallings and the recruiting or the GameSpy signal stealing infractions that they dealt with last year that cost Harbaugh a full game against Penn State as a suspension. The NCAA has yet to rule on that. I imagine that will be coming down very shortly. And one thing that came out of that here over the last couple of weeks, Sherrone Moore, the head football coach, the newly appointed head football coach, erased somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 text messages that were between him and Connor Stallings, the gentleman that was live scouting opponents and stealing their signals. 150 text messages between the two of them. He had erased them and did not come out until the NCAA up front. And when they found out, he did come clean. But, that's going to carry a heavy price for him. And so he could be looking at some maybe suspensions as well. And now the NCAA is looking at Michigan as a repeat offender, which could also up the ante in terms of the penalties that the school would ultimately have to suffer, which could be anything from a bowl ban to, these are just escalates upwards in fines and stuff. So Sherrone Moore, he's going to find out here probably in the next couple of weeks whether or not he's going to be available for that first game or first 2 games of the season. And it places a dark cloud over the Michigan program just because you're going into another year and you're coming off the national championship, and all of a sudden now you're bringing up what happened last season, and it's just not a great look for them, and it's not a very good look for the Big Ten in terms of the situation there as it pertains to sportsmanship and all. Jim Harbaugh was asked in a presser yesterday when he was out for the Chargers, and he basically said he apologizes for nothing as it pertains to Michigan and the Big Ten. So he doesn't feel he did anything wrong as it pertains to the recruiting aspect of things, and he's played dumb in the sense of saying he had no knowledge of what was happening with Connor Stallings and the sign stealing allegations. So pretty big news there. Some IU big news is that Rhett Lewis, who's been in the color analyst for the last couple of years, the former player, NFL Network and host that you see during the training camp sessions over the last few weeks, he has resigned his spot as the color analyst for the Hoosiers and is going to work for the Big Ten Network on Saturday game days with a crew that will be probably mostly in the West for those games, but also probably will see him throughout the Midwest. The Big Ten expanding their coverage area, hiring some new people, especially those people from the Pac-12. So good thing for Red, he get an opportunity to move his career along and get back on TV. So congratulations to him. The other thing with Rhett is he's a part of the Believe Network as well, working a show with the Big Ten in terms of basically covering the Big Ten for Believe. So you can catch him on the Believe Network as well. And like I said, congratulations for him. And coming back to the radio booth, the gentleman that was the running back coach at Indiana under Bill Mallory, Buck Sewer, comes back to the booth and joins Don Fisher for I believe this would be his either second or third go round in the booth. And Rhett was the one that replaced Buck, but Buck's coming back to be alongside Don Fisher. So you'll all be able to hear a familiar voice each and every Saturday on the Hoosier Radio Network throughout Indiana, as well as some of the Midwest. But congratulations for Buck to getting back in the program. And of course, congratulations to Rhett Lewis and his opportunity with the Big Ten Network. Media days did not disappoint in a lot of things that were occurring there. A couple quick points. The Dan Lanning, the head coach of Oregon, Oregon brought the big duck and floated in the White River out there by the NCAA headquarters, kind of placing I guess you could call the proverbial flag in the ground. But that was an interesting dynamic to that. But the new schools joining them, UCLA, USC, of course, Oregon, and as well as Washington, all four joining the Big Ten now and expanding the Big Ten's reach from the East Coast to the West Coast. And it's going to be a interesting dynamic as it pertains to football, basketball, and all sports, really. It's going to be an interesting thing to witness. But the other main thing is Coach Sig's presser, or if you haven't seen it, in his first appearance with all the media, very poignant and very, I guess you say, charismatic in some ways. He kind of let it be known that the last time he was picked second to last in the preseason conference polling, two teams of his went on to play for the conference championship, James Madison and Elon. And those both years, I believe they had 8 or more wins. So he just kind of subtly let it be known, not that it's going to be a forecast of anything, but if you haven't had a chance, you need to take a look at that. And then alongside that, the three gentlemen that came with Coach Sig, Aiden Fisher, the linebacker, Mike Caddick, the offensive lineman center, and Ellison, the running back that transferred in from Wake Forest. All three of those young men did a great job representing Indiana as well as their teammates. They were on the radio with Jim Coyle from the Indiana Sports Beat Radio, and I was there as a co-host on that day, so we got a chance to speak to those three young men and Coach Signet as well. So that is up on YouTube. You can find that. You can search for Jim Coyle or Indiana Sports Beat Radio, and you can probably find that at your disposal. So all those three kids did a great job, and Big Ten Media Days was my first time there as a quote-unquote media person and not a coach. It was a very well-run media day, and very interesting to hear those four new coaches speak about their journey into the Big Ten and what that means to each and every one of their programs and what to expect. And, Dan Lanning picked second in the Big Ten, under Ohio State. Oregon's going to be loaded. They're going to be really good. So that's going to be an interesting dynamic when Oregon and Ohio State line up across from one another. And then, of course, Coach Riley talking about the USC Trojans and what you may expect from them. A pretty interesting dynamic there and who he's hired on the defensive side of the ball. It's kind of the who's of college football. He was able to lure the defensive coordinator from UCLA over after Chip Kelly left, and UCLA's defense last year was stellar. And he got him and then some other hires that he's made on the defensive side of the ball, all with a lot of experience, all with experience running a defense. And the former head coach from North Dakota State joining USC as the linebacker coach. So USC is basically rebuilt and retooled with Coach Riley and his offense and defense. And one thing they needed that they got to get better at this year, of course, is defenses. Their defense last year really cost them in some tough games. And to say that Coach Riley may or may not be on the hot seat, probably not, but it may be a little warm after last year having to fire the defensive coordinator in the middle of the year. So just an overall well attended event, well run by the Big Ten, and got a chance to see and talk to a lot of guys that I've known through the years. The other thing I was able to do, talk to the people that are in charge of the sideline video. That is going to be a part of each and every Saturday. It's about $100,000 worth of equipment. There'll be 18 iPads on the sideline that will sync up with the game video. So when each side of the ball comes to the sideline, they will be able to watch the previous series of plays. And from an offensive line perspective, I would say that is very beneficial, as well as the quarterbacks, to see what they're doing and how they may be doing something. So the NCAA finally joins the ranks of the NFL, which has done this a long time ago. But DV Sports that handles the replay for the NCAA, and all this will be interlinked as it pertains to the sideline dynamics. And Apple and iPad, also a part of it, is signing a deal with the Big Ten to provide the iPads. When I talked to representatives, they said each system's about $100,000, and the home team will be responsible for providing the visiting team their equipment for game day, and the video that is being shot both wide and end zone. So it's what we call the 22 video. All will be synced up from the home's broadcast and sent to the sideline, where they can download those plays and watch them. And they can also get the actual TV footage of a game as well. So technology is on the rise in the NCAA, as well as what the coaches will be able to do on the sideline, which I think is great. And for kids, in the sense that they'll be able to find those adjustments and make them awful quick when they come off the sideline after each and every series. The other thing that will be a big part of this year, and something that the Indiana had a chance to work with last spring and has continued to work with it now, is the communication devices that will be in the place of the quarterback helmet that will talk to the offensive coordinator, and the defensive coordinator being able to talk to their play caller on defense, more likely a linebacker. How that's going to operate is they have a 15-second window to communicate whatever they need to communicate, then it gets shut off and there's no more communication. But the days of the signaling this and that are probably for the most part done. Again, applaud the NCAA for moving along. We've got the technology. We need to take advantage of all of this, because what they're doing in terms of replay, in terms of medical evaluations, they actually have a dedicated doctor that watches games and basically points out potential hits that could cause problems for a kid, so he can communicate with each sideline to tell the trainers, you need to evaluate so-and-so because of this hit here. And it's all about player safety. It's all about the aspect of giving each team equal opportunity to take advantage of technology on each and every Saturday, and I'm all for it. But it's a pretty interesting setup what they've got going. I'm sure they'll work out the kinks as the year go on, because it's never, I guess, would never say that it would be fail-proof in terms of what has to be done on each and every Saturday. But it was a pretty interesting setup to watch them go through it with me and show me the iPad and everything like that, which was a cool thing. Well, also Phil Still's magazine came out, something that I look forward to every year. I've been following Phil's commentary and his columns in terms of what he does in terms of evaluating college football and all the different conferences. And and what he had to say about the Big Ten and some of the schools that Indiana will play in the non-conference. We'll talk about a little bit as we get through those games and start working into the season. But a lot of good information if you'd like to get Phil's overview of not only the Big Ten, but every Power 5 conference as well as mid-major are represented in his publication. Of course, with Indiana, he has a very good, I would say, pulse of what Indiana is not only facing in terms of their schedule this year, but the expectations that Kurt Cignetti has only placed upon themselves and where this football team could be. Defensively, they've got 11 returning starters. And I guess if you include James Madison kids in the equation, that's where you get the 11, and then 10 on offense. So it's a pretty, I guess what you'd call veteran-ish offense and defense for Indiana this year. So got a lot of experience. They got to get them to gel and get things moving in a positive direction. The one thing that I saw that was interesting on the dynamics that he had talked about, he believes there's going to be a big jump in point production this year with Indiana. He believes is going to average close to 30 points a game. When last year they were only averaged about 23 a game. So that's a pretty nice jump. And if they can do that, I think it'll be very, very beneficial for them as a football team. And then on defense, they're calling for about what they gave up during the year that they were pretty good on defense back in 2020, but only figuring to allow 23 or 24 points per game in his estimation in terms of his evaluation and algorithms. He talked about a team coming off a 3-9 season where they lost 6 ball games by 6 points or less. Coach Cignetti even alluded to that. He said, crazy to think that a play here, a play there, they'd be talking about things differently in Bloomington because it would change the whole perception of the program and outlook, because had they won those games, it would have been a great year. And we'd probably be talking about the extensions that the coaches got. But unfortunately for Indiana last year, that was not the scenario. And Coach Cignetti and his high expectations from where he's been, he's won at every place, as Phil Steele pointed out, as it pertained to that, in terms of what he thinks of Coach Cignetti and what he's done at other places. What he sees the Hoosiers being this year, he does feel that they'll go to a bowl game. He does feel that they will be a 6-6 team. I get that understanding of where he's coming from that, but I think they're going to be better than that. But he understands as well does Coach Cignetti, there's a couple games that they have to get. They got to get wins against, and it's not going to be easy. Like teams like against Maryland, Northwestern, those are two of the ones that come to mind. Those are going to be 2 games that will basically give you a little bit of insight of what Indiana could be or what Indiana wished to be in terms of that. But he sees them finishing at 6-6. He has them finishing in 12th place in the Big Ten. A lot of publications have them picked second to last. Phil Steele has them a little higher than that, which I have a tendency to think that's a little bit better representation of what the possibilities could be. But when you look at the middle of the Big Ten and lower, you could throw up a ton of different scenarios. And remember, you got 12 teams playoff coming up now. And if you can finish within the top 4 or 5 in a conference, especially in the Big Ten, you may get 4 teams into the playoffs. And that's the one thing that changes the whole complexion of this year when you talk about overall goals. And of course, every school is going to push for a championship in their conference as a no-brainer. But now you've got the opportunity to go on to the big stage and play in the playoffs. If you were to finish within the top 4 or 5 in your league, and Big Ten being as noteworthy as they are as a conference, I do think that's a reasonable expectation that the Big Ten will get 4 into the big dance, so to speak. And remember, those first round games will be played on campuses throughout the country. So there's a high probability that a Big Ten team will be hosting a game in December where you've got all types of weather that can potentially be a big factor in those games. But I think it's pretty exciting. I think it's exciting for those schools that do get a chance to play in the playoffs, and it's exciting for the student body in order for them to get a chance to get a part of the NCAA playoffs and get a home game. I think those are all things that are very exciting when you talk about the 24 season as a whole, not just from an Indiana's perspective as a whole, what changes are on the horizon, and as well as what you can expect from the Big Ten as a whole. And I do think it's very plausible that the Big Ten could have as many as 4, maybe 5 that get into the playoff, depending on how they finish in terms of the national rankings. The number 1 and number 2 team, I do believe, get a first round bye. So they benefit from that and get a bye that first week. And those other teams will have a chance to go out and play a game and see if they can get themselves moving on to play in a designated bowl game somewhere. So all things of that were interesting in Phil's dynamic as it pertained to the Hoosiers in general. And tonight, that's our focus, Indiana, and what we're going to see here coming up as they, enter the second week of fall camp and entering that phase where you're into full pads and you're now going to start doing a lot of things with this as it pertains to evaluations and things like that. So Phil Steele's magazine, like I said, you can get that online. You can get a digital version of it, or if you want a true hardback version of it, I do believe you can also order that. And if you go to some local bookstores, I would imagine you'll see it there. But I've always enjoyed his insight. I think he does a great job in terms of calculations and interesting aspects of the algorithms behind the X's and O's, so to speak. But he does give a great breakdown and, talks about each and every position, and also talks about, the schedule for Indiana as well. So Phil Steele's magazine is out and available to be purchased. Well, one thing I think wanted to do tonight and kind of give you a background of, what to expect over the, couple weeks. Today I want to look at where the Hoosiers are with fall camp, talk a little bit of what I think a depth chart will look like. And I'm only concerned about first teamers at this point, because I think the second team, while that may be all figured out to some degree, I do think there's a lot of question marks when it comes to a second team unit. But I do believe they have some units that have great depth, and there are some units that are a little thin, meaning a true freshman may have to come onto the scene and play the game in his first year. So it's going to be one of those interesting things as we get going here with all this in terms of what you can expect from the Hoosiers during fall camp. And then also as we move forward with some of this as well, you can expect some things with, we look at Indiana's schedule here on our next big Believe Network and Hoosier Football Tailgate show, we're going to look at the schedule, talk about the dynamics there as it pertains to Indiana and what to expect. Indiana has probably the fewest miles that they will have to travel this year when you talk about the schedule and how it's set up. So they have one of the least traveled schedules for the 24 season. And conversely, I think Penn State is one that's way up in terms of miles to travel, and not including the West Coast teams that either have to make a jaunt across the country to Rutgers or Maryland in that regard, but coming each and every other week into the Midwest. So it's interesting as it pertains to what teams will have to travel quite a bit and what teams got to break. And Indiana's one of those teams that got a break. And then as we get going into the latter part of fall camp, we'll start getting into our opponent breakdowns of the season. First up will be Florida International, of course. We'll talk about them and some video with that. And then that second game at against Western Illinois, I had the privilege to interview the head football coach at Western Illinois, Joe Davis, young man that I've known for a few years, getting an opportunity to lead a program. Did an interview with him a couple weeks ago, right before camp started, and got his insights on what he's working with the Leathernecks and what to expect from them when they come into Bloomington week 2 of the season. So what I want to do right now, let's look at some of these personnel scenarios that are coming about with Indiana right now. Let's look at the offensive side of the ball. Hope everyone can see this. Well, my first graphic, I guess you could say, that I've done in quite a while with everything, and try to get some pictures up and things of that magnitude. So I hope this comes through a little, better and able to see. Let's start up front. That first unit, I tell you, Indiana's got a solid first unit, with Kidwell and Weedig, the transfers, one from Nick is from James Madison, and Trey is from Wisconsin. Kidwell did not practice in the spring. He had some surgery that he had to take care of. And then, of course, Mike Caddick coming back after declaring for the draft. Fine young man. Talked to him at Big Ten Media Days. I can tell right now that he's a good leader, and the kids are going to, probably have a high regard for him in that locker room. So that's a big part of it. And, Tyler Stevens, and then, of course, the young pup, Carter Smith, who played as a true freshman last year, back at that left tackle position. Big get to get him out of the portal and keep him in a Hoosiers uniform. And then, of course, Zach Horton, another JMU transfer, a very talented tight end. He can block at the point of attack. You can spread him out and do some things that way with him. And that's not to discredit some of the other guys that are there at the tight end position. I alluded to Bamba earlier in the Danny Wolford watch list for him. So the tight end position is well represented in terms of players and depth. The offensive line, I do believe they've got 2 solid offensive lines, but there's some shuffling that could go on there with guys in terms of what positions they play, what can they play, and things of that magnitude. But Indiana's offensive line, first unit offensive line, I believe is going to be the best unit they've had in probably 5 to 6 years, maybe even more. Because I do think that's the type of unit that Coach Bobstead has got onto the field, and his influence in that room alone has made them better since the middle of last season up to today. You can bet that they'll have a 2-deep offensive line that guys can step in when somebody gets dinged up, and you're really not seeing a big drop off between the first unit and the second unit. Now, of course, with any offensive line, you got to stay healthy, and that starts in fall camp. these are the guys that each and every day are battling in the trenches, so to speak. And what you don't need to do is get, either of your first or second unit beat up in fall camp on either side of the ball, for that matter. So it's a very tricky situation when you talk about getting kids ready to play a game, but at the same time having to be smart and avoid that injury that could happen. Then we go to wide receiver. The Hoosiers could play 6 to 7 guys on the outside, I think. But if you looked at it, who are the top 3 at this point, I would say you got McCauley, Price, transfer from Texas Tech, and Surratt, the young man from JMU. Those 3 guys, to me, are the 3 top receivers, today. And from what I've gathered from my talking with others in the area, as well as getting feedback from some of the coaches. But Surratt's a kid that, of course, lit up at James Madison last year. He came there transferring from St. Francis, a non-scholarship school in Pennsylvania. He was their best receiver at JMU a year ago. Very, very high targeted player that can do a lot. Now he can play outside, he can play inside. So he'll be one of those guys you're going to see move around quite a bit, because I think they got to figure out ways to get the ball in his hands in space. Donovan, we know what Donovan is, and I think Coach Signetti has alluded to this even to last spring. He's got to find ways to get himself better in practice. He has the tendency, reading the tea leaves, to not maybe go as hard in practice as he should. And it's complicating his growth as a wide receiver. And at times it's one of those things. It's, when you're in the battle for playing time, you can't take any days off, nor can you have a lackadaisical approach. So Donovan, again, great vertical stretcher of the field, can go get the 50-50 balls with that. So the wide receiver room is very deep, and I don't think there's any argument there of who they've got in that room. And they can play as many as 6, maybe 7 guys this season. EJ Williams, a kid that I think also can help this unit. His problem has been injuries, and he's on the sideline again with a strained hamstring. So the train's moving, and if he can't become a everyday, every practice player type of player, he's not going to find the field with this depth of wide receivers in that wide receiver room. It's just it is what it is. And that's been the thing that's hampered him since he's been here, is the injury bug. Running back, you got Black, Ellison, and Lawton. All 3 of these kids are top-notch running backs. Black and Lawton both came from JMU, where they both shared the workload last year. Ellison from Wake Forest. Again, 3 solid backs. And I do think you'll find times that maybe you have two of those guys in the backfield. And I do think they're going to have to find ways to get them get them touches and targeted in the passing game as well, because I think they're, a lot of guys like these 3, you can get them in space in matchups that you should have the advantage of. So Curtis Rourke, of course, the Ohio transfer, I'm not shocking the world here, but if anything, but I do believe he is the number 1 guy on the depth chart after spring ball. I think you can read the tea leaves of what Coach Signetti has said publicly. He had a decent spring. He really was impressed with his growth and maturity, being a transfer coming in. But, Curtis is a kid that played for Ohio U, was the MAC Player of the Year a couple of years ago. So if he can get himself in a position to keep going the way he's going, I do think he'll be the starter on day 1. And that's nothing against Taven, because I do think Taven is progressing the way that they want him to, and he's getting better every day. big issue probably right now is more of the consistency factor, and that was some of the things you saw with him last year. But I do think the quarterback position this year is in a much better place than it was last year at the same time. So when you look at the top 11 guys on offense, that's who I believe they are. But I do think the Hoosiers have a very capable second unit of 11 that they can trot on the field and get playing time. And you may find maybe some newer faces in positions that may be able to help. I don't think you're going to see that at wide receiver with the group that they have in that room now. And it's going to be hard for a young kid to pop in the running back position. So that's the other thing. Outside of Taven, you're probably going to get a good look at Alberto Mendoza, the quarterback first year out of Miami. He was not here in the spring, and Tyler Cherry was able to, do a lot of things from spring on and got acclimated to everything. So at the quarterback position, I do think you've got two really good, solid quarterbacks for Big Ten play. But your depth there is the problem, because after those two, it drops off to young guys. And that's a little bit nerve-wracking because at the quarterback position, you better have two and a solid three, and I don't know if they've got a solid three right now. So that's offensive going into fall camp. Defense, this group, I do think they've improved from where they were at the end of the spring, getting CJ West out of the portal, a good pickup there. And then, of course, D'Angelo Pounds that Coach Signetti alluded to in the presser the other day. He shuts off that side of the field, and he doesn't think they've actually gotten open or beat him on in coverage yet. So a lot of high expectations for him in terms of what they like to do in a defense. And then, of course, I do think their front 3-4 guys up here, Magnum Farrar with being what we call a stud linebacker. He's that hybrid type of guy. The linebacking core, Aiden Fisher and Walker, both these kids played at JMU. So I do think they bring the knowledge of a Brian Haynes ran defense. Terry Jones is another young man who is what we call a nickelback or an extra DB. He provides them a guy that can play up in the line of scrimmage, but also cover guys. So I do think their front seven is better today than it was at the end of spring, mostly because of CJ. And then in the secondary, Singuetti, I believe that's how you pronounce Josh's name, at the free, Alsbury at the strong, a kid that came from Arizona, big, strong kid, 6'1", 220, 25 pounds. I do think he can be a really great asset there. And Jamari Johnson is the other corner. Now, where the concerns are, of course, on defense still is up front in terms of their depth being a really good Big Ten unit. They're not quite there yet. They're going to have to rely on some young guys stepping up into positions of support. Having talked to Coach Haynes prior to start of fall camp, they got to find a couple of young guys that are going to be ready to potentially jump in a role on defense up front, in the secondary, and potentially in the linebacking core. But their front 11, that they're playing with right now, first teamers, I do think is a solid unit. I do think they are a defense that can cause some havoc in what they like to do. It's going to be a depth issue there again, more so on defense than it is on offense, in my opinion. But I do think with what they were able to pick up through the portal after spring up through the summer, I do feel they address some concerns and needs at those positions in terms of what they needed for each and every week. But like I said, depth is going to be a concern. So you may see a couple young guys, true freshmen, a second-year player, potentially being on a role as a backup and seeing some snaps on defense if it's warranted. But as a unit, I do think you got to feel pretty good with what you got. A very influx of JMU flavor, but I do think the Aiden Fisher kid and Walker are two really good linebackers that can do a lot of things. And of course, Pounds is a All-American type of corner that can shut people down. And in the Big Ten, they're going to need it. And they're going up against a receiving corps every day, 7-on-7, one-on-ones, and then full team, that they're not going to see much better in a wide receiver group on the field than what they see each and every day from Indiana's wide receiver room. So Coach Haynes has got his work cut out for him. His first year, he does feel confident with what he's got. He's got to find a couple answers here and there, but that's why he gets paid the big bucks, is to find those answers and get these boys ready to roll come week 1 against Florida International. With that being said, let me see here. I have another one here, I think. Oh, yeah. Some things that I think that Indiana has to get right in fall camp. Now, they're through week 1. They've got their installation for the most part in. I'm talking about their base offenses and base defenses. I would say that Coach Shanahan and the offense feel pretty good at where they're at, as well as Coach Haynes on defense. But these are some 5 things that I do think they have to get right coming out of camp. Number 1, they've got to get the wide receivers and the quarterbacks in sync and on the same page. You got a group that, especially with work, being in at quarterback and 2 young kids coming on the scene, and a wide receiver room that saw some changes. These guys got to get to know each other, and they've got to have that rhythm established coming out of camp. Now, I do think they worked on it all summer in terms of their preparation work. I thought their spring as a whole was decent. There were still some times where I could see some hesitancy in the quarterbacks, not quite sure knowing where they're going to break, but I do believe they do have the right group there. Communication system, the new communication system with the helmets and the DCs and the OCs having the communication devices. Indiana did work on that some over the spring. Coach Signetti said they got a chance to work on that, and now they've done it all through fall camp. But when they come to that week 1, there just can't be any hiccups in terms of communication. Because you got 15 seconds to get what you need relayed to the quarterback that can be called, or on the defense, and after 15, it gets cut off. So you got to be on point with that, because 15 seconds is not a lot of time in some respects. So that one, they got to come out of camp on point with that one. Who is this team as an offense? Who is this team as a defense? And I guess you could look at it this way. What is their makeup offensively? Are they going to be a team that's going to be a 60-40 pass run, or 60-40 run pass, 50-50? How they going to, what the run game looks like? Are they going to be able to line up and power the football? Are they going to have to be a finesse team like they were last year? Didn't really equate very well for them. But I think they've got to have an identity coming out of camp of who they are offensively. And same thing as defense. There may be a lot of things that Coach Haynes and this defensive staff would want or like to do, but they have to understand what each and every kid on that field playing every down, what they can do, what they can't do. And that's where you got to tailor your calls to what they can do. And one thing you don't want to do is overload a defense to the point where they're thinking way too much, and that ultimately takes away from their ability to play fast. So he's one of those guys that believes in not being overly complicated and being able to let kids turn it loose on game days, so they're not playing the game analysis and paralysis, so to speak. Depth at the D-line, established that. The O-line as well. Who are your top 5 O linemen, top 3 or 6 defensive linemen. O-line, your top 10. And then, of course, in the secondary, who is that next round of guys that are going to step on the field in a 2 position, because you're going to need it throughout the season. But they've got to have that established coming out of camp. There can't be any question marks in their eyes. That's one thing last year that really hurt them more so at the quarterback position. When they came out of camp, they didn't not know who the starter was. They were going to do Sorsby was going to start one game, and then Taven was going to start the other game. And then after that, they were going to reevaluate and appoint somebody going into week 3. Well, as we saw, that led to chaos in some respects, and the kids didn't know who their guy was. And I don't think there's any question, like I said, that Curtis Rourke is the guy. Now, if he has a terrible fall camp and Taven Jackson lights it up, that doesn't mean Taven can't overtake it. But in my mind, it's Curtis Rourke that's going to step on that field for their first snap against Florida International, and there's no question mark there. But the depth at O-line, D-line, and in the secondary, really having that locked down as well. And then one thing that I thought was interesting that I didn't realize, that Coach Signetti does not appoint anybody a captain. He does not believe in appointing captains. So in this regard, who steps up and leads? Who are they? Who are those guys that are going to take on that responsibility on and off the field and be a guy that's going to get the attention of the group? Aiden Fisher comes to mind when I think about that, because of, I think, how the kid handles himself. Some of those guys, Caddick, a kid that came back, offensive lineman, is he one of those guys? But they got to have some guys that can lead this football team. And it doesn't have to be 1 or 2. That doesn't mean that gives an opportunity for a lot of kids to be leaders. But, who are they? The coaches have got to know who those guys are. They got to know who has the attention of that locker room when they're not around. So I do think that is 5 key areas there that the Hoosiers must get right in camp, and then be ready coming out of camp to have any questions about their offenses or defenses answered in terms of who is first team, second team. But I do think those are 5 things they got to get right. Of course, they've got to, their kickers for the punters coming back from last year, a highly touted punter that I do think is a weapon that they can utilize, create long fields for the opposing offense, and giving the defense an opportunity to defend a long field. So special teams are going to, be a big part of this team's ability to win games. They got to, each and every week, they got to find ways to gain a possession. And sometimes that's in the special teams, or getting a score, either by the defense or special teams. So special teams will play a big part in Indiana's season, just because they're not going to be a team that I think can overcome a bunch of mistakes, especially in the punt game. They can't turn the ball over. They can't get punts blocked. They can't throw picks and things of that magnitude. And I do think that's one thing that they are focusing in camp on, is about ball security, and as well as gaining takeaways and eliminating giveaways. So those are all things that you're going to see here through the month of August leading up to week 1. I hope I've given you some food for thought, so to speak. And like I said, our next opportunity to get together, I'm going to talk about the schedule, what it is going to take for Indiana to come away with a best case scenario wins and losses, and how you break it down into easily understandable dynamics of a schedule when you've got 12 games on it, and how coaches look at it from the perspective of really breaking it down. But that will be our next time together. I want to thank you again for being with me here this evening. Remember, thanks to Bet Online for all they do for us here at the Hoosier Tailgate. All those affiliates that I have in my bio on my link tree, as well as in the description in the YouTube video. Give them a chance, go see what they got. I've got links to some of the Fanatics and Fans Edge that has a whole dedicated store to Indiana apparel on top of what I offer from my store that you can find at HoosierTailgate.com, HoosierTailgate.com. You'll find it there with other things on that site as well, a little bit of tidbits and also podcast links as well as video links. You can find all that there. Like I said, stay tuned for more camp news as we progress along here on Hoosier Tailgate. Remember, every Thursday I'm on with Jim Coyle to talk Indiana football. You can find that live on YouTube in the morning hours, or you can find it throughout the state of Indiana on a Hoosier network near you. But Indiana Sports Beat Radio with Jim Coyle every Thursday, I am on with him. And remember, we'll be getting into a routine where we bring you 2 shows a week, and that's coming very fast as we approach the start of the 2024 season. Again, thanks for joining me here tonight on the Big Ten Network. I'm the coach, Shannon Griffith. Until next time, my friends, we'll see you later.